They had marched him through the dust storms of Rios, twice that week, and each time Commander Hale noticed the same thing. The slave pens near the southern ridge were quieter than they should have been, too quiet for a site that previously held over 100 captives. Attrition was normal in war zones like this, a grim arithmetic nobody liked, but everyone accepted. Yet something about the way the guards avoided eye contact and the way the local overseer rushed his reports made Hale's instincts grind. He had led too many operations, lost too many good people, to ignore signs like that. The war for Rios wasn't supposed to be this complicated. The planet was resource-light, strategically minor, and should have been a clean sweep to remove the Dravari raiders who'd been running slave auctions in the shadows of abandoned mineral complexes. But Dravari tactics made everything messy. Every time they were pushed back, they destroyed their own records, burned their own captured workers, and left nothing useful behind except scorched ruins and encrypted fragments of comms that their analysts still couldn't crack. Hale wasn't there only to win ground. He was there to dismantle the hidden network that kept the raids profitable. That was why he walked the camp personally, scanning each clattering cage with the harsh white beam of his helm light, listening to the way the metal groaned under the shifting weight of cold bodies. When he found the girl, she was curled in the corner of the smallest cage, thin as wire, formatted against the rusted floor. A small Vulpine, maybe 16, maybe 20, he couldn't tell under the grime and collapse, breathing shallowly, her tail dragged out behind her like something long dead. She didn't look up as he approached, not even when he knelt and unlatched the cage door, which meant she was far worse off than she appeared. Dravari didn't normally transport Vulpine slaves unless they had a purpose. They were agile, sensory-sharp, useful for reconnaissance or delicate labor. The fact that she had been left here, abandoned, half-starved, told Hale something deeper was wrong. He checked her pulse, weak, erratic, and signaled his medic over the channel. The reply came back flat. Commander, orders are to triage only. Anything below category red gets left for recovery crews. Our stretchers are full. Hale didn't respond. He muted the channel and lifted the girl carefully. She weighed almost nothing. Her head lolled forward. A quiet sound escaped her, the faintest, instinctive exhale of fear or pain. He could feel every eye in the courtyard watching him. Soldiers, technicians, even the liberated prisoners. They all knew the rule. With limited evac capacity, only those physically capable of stabilizing were to be transported. The others were to be logged and retrieved when more ships arrived. It was ugly, but it kept the most alive. Command logic. War logic. He stood and carried her anyway. No one stopped him, though a few exchanged looks, the kind that said this could cost him operational time, fuel, maybe even political leverage if command started asking why a non-human slave outranked the prioritized evac list. He didn't care. He radioed for a shuttle, but the static that came back was thick, filled with slicing interference. Jamming again, his pilot, Lyra, said from the comm tent. Dravari drone clouds are cycling through frequencies. We can't get anything heavier than a medical skimmer in the air. Send the skimmer, Hale said. Load 2 med kits and a thermal blanket. And route power through manual uplink if you have to. By the time he reached the landing pads, wind blasting red grit across the scorch lines where dropships had taken off earlier, the med skimmer was descending in a wobbling arc that told him the jamming was affecting its stabilizers. Lyra met him at the hatch, pushing her goggles up. She opened her mouth to comment on the girl, then shut it instantly. Her expression shifted, first calculation, then a hard nod. They strapped the girl in and sealed the hatch. She needs fluid, heat, and a clean biometric channel, Lyra said, activating the med console. But if the Dravari jammers keep pushing this much noise across the spectrum, the auto-injectors won't calibrate, and we'll have to do manual. That means guesswork on dosage with a species we barely have files on. Hale tightened the harness around the girl's fragile frame. She was left to die? That means she knows something the Dravari didn't want to carry with them. Or she's just useless to them, Lyra muttered, but her tone lacked conviction. Hale saw it. She understood too. The Dravari never abandoned assets unless those assets posed a liability. The skimmer rose and jolted sideways. Warning runes flared across the cockpit screens. Something flickered over the horizon, like a swarm of metallic insects catching the last of the fading sun. Hale braced himself as Lyra cursed and cut the throttle. Drone cloud. They're masking their signatures with reflective static. I can't tell if they're mapping our position or charging weapons. Hale activated the turret feed. The drone cloud moved strangely, not attacking, not retreating, but circling, observing, as if waiting for something. They know we took her, Hale said quietly. Lyra shifted a control lever. Then they also know we're trying to get her off planet, which means they'll keep us grounded until they can retake her or silence her. The med console beeped sharply. The girl convulsed weakly, her breaths turning shallow. Hale grabbed the manual injector, holding it above the narrow vein visible under her arm fur. He had administered injections on human, Centauri, Krell, even reptilian hybrids. But Vulpine were different. Their vascular structures ran closer to the surface, and an overdose would shut down their thermal regulation almost instantly. He took a slow breath, feeling the drone cloud shadow tremble across the skimmer as Lyra tried to hold them steady. He inserted the injector. The fluid coursed in. Her pulse trembled, then stabilized into a thin but steady line on the monitor. The drone cloud surged suddenly, fragments breaking away like a school of fish darting toward prey. Lyra slammed the throttle open, veering low, using the canyon walls for cover. Hale held the girl steady. The skimmer engine strained, heat readings climbing into the yellow. Alarms shrieked. The drone split, half taking a parallel path through the upper ridge, the other half diving behind the skimmer as if hurting them. They're pushing us, Lyra said. They want us to go east. Hale looked at the terrain map. East was a dead zone, a region where satellites couldn't scan through the volcanic crust. A perfect spot for an ambush. Ignore their vector. Cut south. She didn't argue. She banked hard, engines screaming, bouncing the skimmer through a pocket of turbulent air. The drone cloud adjusted instantly, shifting formations with eerie precision. Hale recognized the pattern. Dravari adaptive pursuit. It meant they had a commander on the ground feeding them real-time data. Lyra's voice cracked through the noise. If they corner us, we're done. We can't fight a full swarm with a med skimmer. Hale looked down at the unconscious girl. Thin, bruised, bones like glass. But the shape of her muzzle, the distinctive amber markings in her fur, he had seen those before. Not on the battlefield. In a briefing months ago, a report on a rebel splinter cell that had stolen Dravari tactical archives. Among the listed collaborators was a Vulpine scout reputed to have near-photographic sensory recall. If this girl was that scout, she wasn't just a victim. She was a threat to the Dravari, and the key to their encrypted comm lattice. Hale's grip tightened. Lyra, get us home. She grit her teeth. I'll try. The drone swarm closed in. The skimmer engines flared dangerously. A warning flashed, core temperature critical. The girl gasped sharply, body shuddering, eyes flickering open for the first time. She stared at Hale, fear, exhaustion, and something else buried deep. Recognition. And in that split instant before her eyes closed again, Hale understood something with absolute clarity. The Dravari weren't trying to eliminate the skimmer. They were trying to capture her alive. The skimmer dropped into a sudden downdraft. Hale grabbed the harness. Lyra shouted over the roar. Hold on. This is going to. The world tilted as the drone cloud descended like a wave collapsing inward, closing around them as the skimmer hurtled toward the canyon floor. The last thing Hale saw was the girl's fingers twitching weakly, as if reaching for something only she could see, before the impact alarms drowned everything else. The skimmer hadn't crashed cleanly. It had ricocheted down the canyon slope in a series of grinding half-rolls, scattering shards of hull plating across the red rock until it jammed sideways between two jagged outcrops. Smoke bled from the fractured engine housing. Hale tasted copper and dust as he forced his eyes open, vision swimming in red static from his cracked visor feed. The emergency restraints had locked him in place during the final impact, but the jolt had slammed his shoulder hard enough that he felt the hot throb of bruised bone every time he moved. Lyra coughed beside him, ripping off her broken harness and reaching instinctively for the throttle, even though the console was nothing but sparking ruin. She blinked grit from her lashes, eyes adjusting to the dim interior. They'll be swarming us within minutes, she rasped. We need cover. Hale checked the girl first. The Vulpine lay crumpled against the wall, the harness torn but still holding her upright. Her breathing was shallow but steady, remarkably steady, considering the role. Hale unfastened her straps, lifting her carefully into his arms. She stirred faintly at the movement, eyes flickering but not waking. "We move now," Hale said. Lyra forced open the side hatch, wincing as the bent metal screeched. Dust blasted inward. The canyon around them was narrow, walls steep, allowing almost no sky exposure. That limited the drone's maneuverability but didn't stop them entirely. Hale climbed out with the girl pressed to his chest. Lyra grabbed a pair of emergency packs, slinging one over her shoulder and thrusting the other at him. "Charge cells are low. We can't run any heavy scans. And weapons, we improvise," Hale said. They scrambled down the rocks, boots sliding, trying to reach a lower crevice where the canyon forked. The wind carried the faint metallic hum of converging drones, the sound like steel wings slicing air. Lyra glanced upward. "They're coming in fast. They'll spot movement if we stay in the open." Hale shifted the girl's weight, studying the terrain. The walls here had patterns, straight lines where softer rock layers had eroded faster, leaving narrow shelves that might hide them if used right. "We go left," he said. "There's overhang cover. The drones will lose line of sight." Lyra followed without argument. They ducked into the shadowed split just as a cluster of drones swept over the ridge, scanning beams flickering along the canyon floor. Hale pressed himself against the stone, holding the girl's limp form tight, careful not to jostle her more than necessary. The drones hesitated above the wreckage, then broke formation and fanned outward in a widening search pattern. "They aren't guessing," Lyra whispered. "They know she survived the crash, which means they're getting live intel from a ground operator." Hale checked the emergency pack. Rations, heat patch, 2 microdetonators, a short-range comm relay, useless under the jamming. "No weapons. We need to reach Outpost 17, he said. "If we can get the relay uplinked through their hardline, we can bypass the jamming." "That's a 3-hour hike," Lyra said. "With her condition, with us flagged, with drones overhead, we don't have another option." Hale adjusted his grip on the girl. Her ears twitched faintly at the echo of drone hum overhead. Her breathing hitched. Hale felt a faint tremor move through her, a subconscious instinct, like prey sensing a predator's proximity. They moved deeper into the canyon split, careful not to dislodge loose stones that would reveal their position. The path narrowed until they were forced to edge sideways. Lyra took point, scanning every shadow, every crack in the stone. The canyon eventually opened into a wider basin where long-dead lava flows had carved warped channels through the terrain. Hale paused, listening. The metallic hum was distant, for now. Lyra crouched near a set of faint tracks in the dust. "Dravari boots," she murmured. 3, maybe 4. Heading southeast. Hale frowned. Toward the geothermal fields. Lyra swallowed. "That's close to 17. Hale's jaw tightened. If the Dravari had a ground team moving in that direction, the outpost could be compromised, or already taken. He scanned the basin more carefully. The layer of dust was thin but disturbed in irregular patterns. The tracks weren't fresh, but recent enough to matter. The girl stirred again, this time more violently. Hale knelt, steadying her. Her eyes opened for a split second, pupils sharp, too aware for someone barely conscious. Her fingers clenched weakly in his jacket, as if trying to convey something. Lyra crouched beside them. "Is she?" "She's trying to communicate," Hale said. The girl's lips moved, but produced no sound. She wasn't just weak. Her vocal cords were damaged, maybe from dehydration or punishment. Hale leaned closer. "What is it?" Her hand twitched in a direction, northeast, toward the ridge beyond the basin. Lyra followed the gesture. "There's nothing that way except broken vents and collapsed tunnels." Hale hesitated. The Dravari tracks went southeast, toward the outpost. The girl pointed northeast, toward dead ground. But her awareness was growing. Her eyes were beginning to track movement, her muscles responding more intentionally. That meant her cognitive functions were returning, and with them, potentially, the intel she carried. He trusted instinct, his and hers. "We follow her," Hale said. Lyra stared. "Commander, she didn't survive by accident. She has purpose." Lyra exhaled hard. "Fine, but if we're heading into dead zones, we'll lose the last of our comm readings." Hale nodded. "Then we rely on terrain, shadow, heat signatures, and luck." They crossed the basin quickly, staying low between rock spines. The wind shifted, carrying the sharp scent of sulfur, the geothermal fields. The ground here had hairline cracks that glowed faintly with residual heat from old vents, making long, snaking lines like veins under skin. The girl reacted again, body tensing, ears angling toward the ridge. Hale lifted his gaze. At first he saw nothing but uneven stone. Then he caught the shimmer, barely visible waves in the air, like heat distortion, but rhythmic. Active cloaking field. He whispered. Lyra stiffened. Dravari tech? Hale moved slowly around the rock formation. The shimmer intensified, resolving into a faint holographic mesh that flickered where the field struggled to maintain coherence. The girl lifted her hand weakly, pointing at the distortion. Hale reached out, fingers passing through. The air rippled, and a concealed entrance snapped into view. A maintenance tunnel. Old. Abandoned. Reinforced with scavenged metal. And used recently. Lyra exhaled. She led us to a hideout. No, Hale said. She led us to something the Dravari wanted hidden. They slipped inside. The tunnel swallowed the light, the air turning cool and still. Hale activated a dim headlamp, low intensity to avoid detection. The passage continued downward in a shallow slope before opening into a chamber filled with broken crates, cracked datapads, and shredded wiring. But one object stood out. A central console. Half buried. Damaged, but intact enough to pulse with low-power standby light. Lyra stepped closer. This is Dravari architecture, but smaller, more compact. Hale studied the interface. It's a tactical relay hub. Lyra froze. You mean, this is where they coordinate drone clouds? Partially, but more importantly, this is where they route encryption keys. Hale looked at the girl. She blinked up at the console, expression tightening faintly in recognition. Lyra's breath caught. Commander, I think she remembers this place. Hale touched the console. The standby light brightened, reacting to proximity. Lyra stepped back. If the Dravari ground team was headed for 17, they weren't trying to intercept us. They were trying to secure this hub, or destroy it before we found it. And the drone cloud? Meant to herd us away from here. Hale looked around the chamber. A faint hum reverberated through the walls now, rising slowly. Not the drones. Something bigger. We triggered something, he said. The girl struggled upright, reaching shakily toward the console. Hale helped guide her hand. Her fingers brushed the surface, and the entire chamber buzzed to life. Holographic schematics flared upward, dim but legible enough to display network paths, drone formations, and the outline of a massive underground structure directly beneath them. Lyra's eyes widened. They built a central control core under the geothermal vents. That's their command node, Hale said. The one controlling every drone on this side of the continent. The girl swayed, eyes fixed on the descending schematic of the core. She made a faint gesture, downward. Hale tightened his grip on her. She's saying we can reach it. The hum in the walls intensified. Lyra spun toward the entrance. Commander, drones inbound. They're locking on to the tunnel entrance. Hale lifted the girl into his arms again, heart hammering. If she was right, if they could reach the control core, they could shut down the entire drone network. But only if they moved now. Dust trembled from the ceiling as the first drone slammed into the outer wall. Lyra pulled a micro-detonator from her pack. We collapsed the entrance behind us. Slow them down. Hale nodded. Do it. Lyra set the charge and sprinted after Hale as he carried the girl deeper into the tunnel, toward the hidden descent. The detonator blew, rock shattering, sealing off the daylight. The chamber plunged into full darkness, lit only by the flickering glow of the holographic schematics. The hum below intensified, rising like a mechanical heartbeat. And then the floor vibrated, just enough for Hale to understand one thing with cold certainty. They weren't just close to the core. They had awakened it. The floor plates vibrated again, this time with a deeper resonance, as if something massive beneath the geothermal crust had stirred for the first time in years. Hale steadied himself against the curved tunnel wall, adjusting the unconscious girl in his arms while Lyra swept her dim lamp across the descending passage ahead. The narrow corridor they'd entered sloped downward in a spiral, its edges reinforced with scavenged alloys that didn't match any official registry. The Dravari had carved this place using stolen tech, patchwork gear, and whatever they had stripped from mining stations and abandoned colonies. It wasn't elegant, but it was functional and dangerous, especially now that the entire system seemed to be waking. The hum that filled the tunnel had changed pitch. What had been a low vibration now carried modulation, almost like signal pulses echoing through the metal. Lyra shivered. "Commander, that sounds like a warm-up cycle." Hale listened. She was right. That wasn't infrastructure coming online. That was a core reactor powering up. "The Dravari operators must have remote-triggered a failsafe," Hale said. "Either they know we found the hub, or they always had a deadman ignition built in." "So either way," Lyra said, "we're heading toward a live tactical core that thinks we're intruders." Hale adjusted the girl again as she shifted in his arms. Her breathing had stabilized, but her eyelids fluttered like she was caught between waking memory and the echo of something traumatic. Then her hand tightened suddenly on his jacket. Not spasms. Intent. She pointed weakly ahead, deeper down. Hale frowned. "She wants us to keep moving." Lyra raised the lamp to illuminate the next section of passage. The spiral opened into a broader shaft reinforced with dark steel ribs. Heavy wires ran along the walls, some new, some frayed, some dangerously exposed. Hale felt heat radiating from below, but not furnace heat. Reactor heat, controlled but rising fast. Lyra kept her weapon drawn, even though the charge cell blinked low. "If the Dravari core is waking, we'll have automated defenses ahead. Turrets, sensors, maybe crawlers. We'll adapt," Hale said. Lyra gave a dry huff. "That's your answer to everything. It's kept us alive so far." As they descended into the next chamber, the tunnel opened into a dome-shaped space filled with server pillars arranged in circular patterns. Most were powered down, but a few flickered with residual life, dim blue pulses racing up and down the columns like heartbeat tracers. "This is a data vault," Lyra whispered. "A real one." Hale scanned the nearest pillar. It contained layered encryption, Dravari glyphs, structural fractals, shifting authentication cycles. Impossible to brute force manually. But the girl's ears twitched at the pulsing lights. She lifted her hand, reaching toward the pillar's interface with trembling fingers. Hale crouched, lowering her so she could touch it. When her fingertips brushed the surface, the pulse pattern changed instantly. The servers recognized her. Lyra's jaw went slack. "She has access credentials. Or a mapped biometric," Hale said, "which means she wasn't just a slave." The pulses accelerated, light flowing in synchronized patterns until the entire vault flickered and projected a holographic array in the air above them. A map. A live network layout of every drone cluster on the continent. Lyra swore softly. "This is their entire air grid. If Command sees this, if we can get this out, we flip the whole campaign." Hale studied the projected paths. The drones weren't operating independently. They were linked to a subterranean core that fed predictive models into their formation algorithms. That was why they were so precise. Why they always anticipated movement. "This isn't just coordination," Hale said. "This is preemptive pursuit logic." Lyra swallowed. "Meaning?" "Meaning the drones don't react to us. They predict us." The girl tugged weakly at his sleeve. Hale looked down. She pointed again, past the pillars, toward another archway leading deeper. "She wants to show us something," Lyra said. "Or warn us." Hale nodded. "We keep going." They moved through the vault, following the girl's unsteady gestures. The hum in the floors grew louder, carrying a rising oscillation that felt like pressure inside the skull. As they passed through the next archway, the lights changed, from dim blue pulses to steady red glows embedded along the walls. Lyra froze. Red means active defenses. Hale scanned with his damaged visor. The distortion along the ceiling confirmed it. Auto turrets tracking movement in passive mode, not yet switched to lethal. He whispered, "Stay slow. Don't cross the center line." They edged along the curved wall, careful not to break beam patterns. The girl's breathing grew more strained, but she kept her gaze fixed ahead. Near the end of the chamber, a reinforced door stood half open. Its locking bolts melted outward from a controlled breach. Someone had forced entry recently. Lyra pointed at the scorch marks. Dravari Commando Unit. Plasma cutters. Hale slipped through the narrow gap. The chamber beyond was drastically different from the crude tunnels above. It was clean, sterile. High-grade alloys lined the walls in geometric precision, a stark contrast to the ramshackle design of the earlier structures. This room wasn't built by raiders. This was original infrastructure, pre-Dravari. "What is this place?" Lyra whispered. Hale didn't answer. He recognized the architecture. It matched the old colonial plans for geothermal management centers used across frontier worlds decades ago, before many were abandoned. If the Dravari had taken control of one, they had inherited far more than a hiding place. They had inherited a full geothermal command pillar and turned it into a drone intelligence core. Lyra knelt by a terminal. I'm picking up radiation traces. Microreactor signature. Hale stepped deeper. The girl stirred more urgently. She raised her hand with sudden clarity, pointing toward a sealed inner chamber. Hale approached the door, thick, blast-shielded, still warm to the touch. Through its small observation slit, faint light flickered inside. Hale unsealed the hatch and pushed it open. The room beyond held a tall central device, half reactor, half neural lattice, suspended by magnetic clamps. Cables snaked from it into the floor and ceiling like roots feeding a living machine. But that wasn't what made Hale stop. A figure slumped against the base of the device. A Dravari operator. Dead. No visible wounds. No struggle. Just collapsed in place. Lyra entered behind him. What happened to him? Hale knelt and checked the corpse's neck. Cold. Gray. But not dehydrated or starved. Instead, the pupils were dilated wide. Neural shock. The core drained him, Hale said. Lyra blanched. Like it used him for input. Or like it reacted to something it couldn't process. Hale studied the core more carefully. The Dravari had routed stolen neural profiles through its predictive systems, giving the drone network near-human adaptability. But the lattice looked damaged, fractures along the memory rails, scorched nodes. The girl reached out suddenly, grabbing Hale's sleeve with more strength than before. She pointed at the lattice, then at herself, then shook her head fiercely. Lyra inhaled sharply. She's saying she was connected to it. Hale felt a cold certainty settle in his gut. The Vulpine girl wasn't a random captive. She had been a neural interface, someone whose sensory recall and cognitive mapping were exploited to refine the drone predictions. A living processor, a force contributor. And the Dravari had abandoned her not because she was useless, but because she had become dangerous. She knew too much. The hum in the floors deepened abruptly, becoming a tremor that rattled loose dust from the ceiling. Lyra looked around. The reactor is spiking. The Dravari must have triggered a core purge, Hale said. They realized we accessed the hub. Lyra swore. They're going to overload the entire geothermal pillar. Hale shifted the girl in his arms and stepped away from the lattice. Then we have one option. We shut it down manually. That's suicide, Lyra said. And even if we reach the controls in time, we don't know the fail-safe sequence. But the girl raised her hand again, touching Hale's chest, then pointing with certainty at the base of the device. Hale followed her gesture. There, beneath the operator's slumped body, was a secondary control panel. Half hidden, locked behind biometric sealing. The girl leaned forward from his arms, pressing her palm weakly against the panel. The seal flashed. Unlocked. Lyra exhaled. She can override their systems. Because she was part of it, Hale said. The tremor intensified. Warning lights strobed across the chamber. Hale laid the girl gently against the wall and knelt by the open panel, scanning the interface. It displayed 3 critical systems: primary coolant flow, neural lattice integrity, geothermal containment pressure. All rising. All seconds from redline. He reached for the manual override when the room suddenly shook. This time not from internal surge, but from impact. Something hammered the exterior walls. Lyra crouched beside him, weapon raised. Commander, the drones found another entrance. Hale's stomach tightened. They can't fire in here, or they'll destabilize the core. They'll try to breach and reclaim control manually. The girl looked at the door, ears flattening. Fear. Or warning. Hale met Lyra's eyes. We don't have time. We have to initiate a hard shutdown. If you miscalculate, Lyra said, this whole pillar goes up. Hale grabbed the manual control lever. Then we don't miscalculate. A second impact slammed the outer wall, metal groaning. Lyra flinched. Commander, they're cutting through. Hale pulled the lever. The lights dimmed. The hum shifted pitch. And then, a deep, descending whine filled the chamber. The core was reacting, but not shutting down. Reconfiguring. The hologram above the lattice flickered. Drone formations shifted. Patterns rewrote themselves in real time. Lyra's voice cracked. Hale, what did you just activate? He stared at the displays as cold dread settled in his chest. The Dravari had anticipated a manual shutdown attempt. The lever he pulled wasn't a kill switch. It was a reroute switch, and he had just redirected the entire drone network into autonomous lockdown mode. Fully independent, fully hostile. Outside, something exploded. The wall buckled inward. Dust filled the chamber. Lyra grabbed the girl, shielding her with her body. Hale rose slowly, eyes fixed on the trembling reactor as the drone network sealed itself into combat state. He had tried to disable their core. Instead, he had triggered their war protocol. And the first drones were already tearing through the wall. The first breach ripped through the outer wall with a shriek of tearing alloy, showering the chamber in dust and fragments as the drones poured through in a staggered, serpentine wave. Hale pulled Lyra and the girl behind the central lattice column, metal vibrating under the concussive blasts as the leading drones snapped open like mechanical predators, limbs reconfiguring into slicing tools meant for close-quarters reclamation. These were not the scouting models they'd faced above ground. These were infiltration units designed to retrieve assets alive or eliminate threats with surgical precision. Lyra fired a short burst from her pistol, the half-spent charge cell coughing out a pale arc that struck the nearest drone, staggering it but not disabling it. She hissed in frustration as the weapon flashed low battery in red. Hale knew their ammunition was a drop in an ocean. The core chamber was too tight, too unstable, too volatile for a prolonged firefight. Any stray shot into the reactor shielding could accelerate the overload. Any drone-cutting tool could rupture coolant lines. And every second they delayed, the autonomous war protocol he had triggered spread further through the network, solidifying into formation logic the Dravari commanders couldn't override even if they wanted to. The drones began to flank. Hale shoved Lyra and the girl toward the auxiliary passage on the right. Move now. Stay low. Don't let them encircle us. Lyra didn't argue. She ducked under a slicing limb that screamed through the air where her head had been a heartbeat earlier, sparks spraying as it collided with metal. Hale grabbed a loose conduit pipe from the debris and swung it with brutal force into the drone's sensory array, cracking the lens. The machine staggered sideways, recalibrating. Not destroyed, but blind for a moment. Enough to create space. Hale backed toward the auxiliary tunnel, covering Lyra's retreat as she half-dragged the girl along. The Vulpine's eyes were halfway open now, faint light reflecting off them, her awareness flickering in and out as if her mind hovered on the edge of something crucial. She looked at the central lattice with a fear that wasn't simple instinct. Memory. Connection. Hale shoved the thought aside for the moment and focused on survival. Another drone charged, bladed limbs unfolding like wings. Hale sidestepped, letting its momentum carry it past before smashing the pipe into its joint cluster. A sickening snap echoed through the chamber as the limb bent inward at an unnatural angle. The drone collapsed, screeching in garbled static. But more were coming. Hale sprinted into the auxiliary tunnel just as Lyra reached the midpoint, the girl slung over her shoulders. The tunnel curved sharply left, then dropped into a narrow descent lined by coolant pipes and ancient power conduits. The hum from the reactor pulsed through the walls, steady before, now jagged and uneven. The war protocol was forcing the core to route power unpredictably. It was becoming unstable. Hale shouted ahead, "We need distance from the lattice. If the core vents, the first blast will." A thunderous boom shook the facility, cutting him off. The walls shuddered, dust raining from overhead. Lyra staggered, but kept moving. "They're detonating entry points behind us." "No," Hale said, listening to the tone of the tremor. That was internal. A coolant line ruptured. Lyra cursed under her breath. If this place blows, a new sound rose through the corridor. Not mechanical, not structural. A rhythmic, staccato pounding, boots on metal. Multiple pairs. Hale pushed ahead. Dravari ground team. They triggered a breach on the far side. The tunnel opened into a crossroads chamber with 3 branching routes. Lyra skidded to a stop. Which way? Before Hale could answer, the girl suddenly lifted her head. She breathed in shallow bursts, her ears twitching at something only she could hear. Then she reached out and tapped Hale's chest, pointing toward the rightmost tunnel. Lyra frowned. "Commander, do we trust that? We can't verify anything down here." "She's connected to this place," Hale said. "She knows its layout. She also might be remembering things out of sequence, Lyra countered. But the girl tapped Hale again, harder this time, eyes sharpening with clarity he hadn't seen since they found her. Hale didn't hesitate. We follow her. They took the right-hand tunnel, descending deeper into the facility. The air grew hotter, thicker with mineral dust and humidity from ruptured steam vents. The corridor was wider here, lined with graded walkways and maintenance rails. Support beams loomed overhead like skeletal ribs. Hale recognized the architecture instantly, a geothermal coolant ring. A massive circular system used to regulate underground temperature during energy extraction. Lyra's eyes widened. This connects to the core's lower control stack. Exactly, Hale said. If we can reach the control spine before the autonomous mode completes its full cycle, we can sever the lattice connection and isolate the drones. And if we're too late, Lyra said, the entire drone network becomes permanently independent, and we lose the planet. Not just the planet, Hale said grimly. Everything within drone radius. Every outpost. Every settlement. The girl reached weakly for the railing. Hale steadied her. She knows the shutdown sequence, he said. Or at least part of it. More impacts thundered through the ring. Lyra spun. Drones behind us. Hale pushed her forward. They'll struggle in the heat. We won't. Move. They ran. Heat shimmered across the walkway as the coolant ring curved around, each section marked by ancient control pillars. Most were dark, but one, near the midpoint, glowed with faint green indicators. The girl reached out toward it. Hale veered that way. Lyra, help her access the panel. I'll cover. Lyra set the girl down gently. The Vulpine pressed her palm against the surface, and the panel flared to life. Lines of cascading script scrolled rapidly. Hale stood guard, gripping the pipe with both hands, listening as drones clattered through the corridor behind them like metal beasts skittering along steel. The girl's fingers moved shakily across the interface despite her weakness. Her breath grew ragged. She recognizes the commands, Lyra murmured, eyes wide. Commander, she's not just recalling this facility. She's recalling her role in it. Hale risked a glance back. Shadows twisted near the corridor entrance, drones crawling along the walls and ceiling, avoiding the hottest sections of metal. Hale tightened his grip. How long? Lyra scanned the feed. I don't know. She's bypassing the predictive lattice links individually. But it looks like she's unlocking the manual override for. The lights overhead flickered violently. A wave of heat blasted upward through the grate. Hale shouted, "Get down." A column of white-hot vapor burst from the coolant vent directly beneath the walkway ahead, sending a shockwave through the ring. The facility groaned. Lyra shielded the girl with her body. Hale braced himself on the railing. Then a harsh, synthetic voice boomed through the entire chamber, Dravari command language broadcasting through internal speakers. Lyra went pale. They triggered a core lockdown command. Hale nodded grimly. They're trying to seal us inside until the lattice stabilizes into full autonomous control. The drone screamed through the corridor. Hale shoved off the railing and met them with raw force. The first one leapt at him, limbs spinning open into cutting arcs. Hale ducked under the slash, drove the pipe upward into its lower joint cluster, and slammed it into the grate. The impact sparked and smoke belched from its casing as its limbs twitched violently. More crawled over its body, using it as a ramp. Lyra dragged the girl back from the fight, trying to shield her from stray debris. The girl reached toward the panel again, eyes narrowing with fierce determination despite her weakness. Hale took a step back as two drones lunged simultaneously. He blocked one blade with the pipe, but the second clipped his shoulder, scorching the armor and forcing him to drop to one knee. Another drone scuttled along the ceiling, positioning itself for a plunge attack. Hale rolled aside as it crashed down where he'd been, splitting the walkway grate. "Commander," Lyra shouted, voice sharp with panic. "She's almost there, but I think the system is fighting her." Hale staggered to his feet, raising the pipe as the remaining drones circled. He had seconds, maybe less. "Tell her to finish it." Lyra knelt beside the girl. "You can do this. Whatever memory they took from you, take it back." The girl pressed both palms to the interface. Her eyes glowed with reflected data streams as line after line of encrypted pathways unlocked. The chamber lights dimmed, then surged. Hale swung the pipe at the nearest drone, shattering its sensor array. Another lunged, and Hale rammed the pipe straight through the joint gap in its chassis, feeling metal crunch around the tool. The walkway trembled beneath them. Lyra looked at the glowing pillar. "Commander, if she activates the lower control spine manually, the reactor will drop into cold sequence." "Good," Hale gasped, bracing for another drone charge. "We need the core offline." "You don't understand," Lyra said, voice cracking. "A cold sequence at this depth could rupture the upper vents and collapse half the facility." Hale froze. The girl paused, her hand hovering over the final patch point. Hale locked eyes with Lyra. "If we don't stop the lattice, the drones will wipe out everything topside. And if we do this wrong," Lyra said, "we won't make it out alive." Another drone lunged for Hale. He pivoted, drove the pipe into its frame, and pinned it against the railing. Its limbs slashed wildly, sparks flying. "We don't need to survive," Hale growled. "We need to win." Lyra's jaw clenched. She placed her hand over the girl's. "Do it." The girl pressed the final node. The coolant ring lights flared white. A deafening blast of air roared upward through the vents, and the entire reactor shifted into cold shutdown. The floor quaked. The ceiling groaned. The walkway buckled. Steam geysers erupted across the chamber, forcing the drones back as their systems overloaded. Hale braced as the whole ring tilted, a section collapsing behind him with a thunderous crash. Metal screeched as support beams warped. Lyra grabbed the girl, pulling her close. "Commander, we need to move." Hale tore his pipe free from the sparking drone frame and ran. The walkway collapsed in chunks behind them as they sprinted around the coolant ring. The emergency lights flickered blue, shutdown mode engaged. A good sign. A deadly one. They reached the far end of the ring where a maintenance lift shaft descended into the lowest levels. Hale wrenched open the manual gate. "Down. Go." Lyra carried the girl inside. Hale jumped in after them. Above, the coolant ring split open with a deafening roar as molten rock poured into the collapsing chamber, swallowing drones whole. The lift dropped several meters before Hale ripped the emergency brake. They slammed to a stop as the cavern above them caved in, sealing off the entire path back. Dust drifted down the shaft. Silence followed. Lyra leaned against the wall, trembling. "We're trapped." Hale looked down the shaft. Darkness stretched below, deep, quiet, and unnervingly cold. The girl opened her eyes, weak but lucid. She pointed downward. Hale followed her gaze. "She says there's another way out," Lyra whispered. "Or another fight waiting," Hale said. He met the girl's gaze. "Either way, we keep going." And together, they descended into the black depths beneath the dying reactor, toward whatever waited in the core's final chamber. The descent into the lower shaft felt endless. Hale lowered himself rung by rung, the metal ladder vibrating faintly with every distant structural groan from the dying geothermal pillar above. Lyra followed carefully, one arm holding the girl against her chest, while the other steadied her grip. The air down here was different, colder, denser, carrying an undercurrent of metallic tang that hinted at machinery still operating far below. The girl stirred occasionally, her weakened body reacting to the shifting temperature as though her senses knew exactly where they were headed. Hale paused halfway down and glanced toward the dim glow rising from the depths. "We're nearing a heat sink chamber," he said softly. Lyra adjusted her grip on the girl. "Why would the Dravari build a heat sink at the lowest level?" "To stabilize the neural lattice," Hale answered. "A system like that generates massive thermal spikes. If something went wrong, it would need a controlled environment to survive." "Survive?" Lyra echoed skeptically. "Machine systems don't survive. They shut down or burn out." Hale didn't answer. His gut told him this wasn't just machinery. Not anymore. When they reached the bottom, they stepped into a cavernous chamber with walls curved like the inside of a pressure dome. Faint light pulsed from the far end, not bright enough to reveal details, but enough to illuminate the silhouettes of enormous cooling fins lining the room. The heat here wasn't oppressive like the upper levels. It was controlled, regulated, artificial. Hale moved forward cautiously, pipe still in hand, feeling the subtle thrum of energy vibrating through the metal floor. Lyra exhaled slowly. "This place is still powered." Hale nodded. "The core shut down, but the lower systems are isolated. They're running on auxiliary." The girl lifted her head. Her eyes focused for the first time with surprising clarity, and she pointed toward the far side of the chamber, toward the pulsing light. Hale followed her gaze. The light brightened gradually, revealing a structure at the center of the room. Not a machine. Not entirely. It was a vertical frame, half organic, half synthetic, interwoven with neural strands and crystalline nodes that glowed with soft, internal rhythms. For a moment, Hale thought it was just another part of the core's predictive system. Then he saw the shape attached to it. A body. Thin, elongated, suspended inside the lattice like a preserved specimen. Tubes fed into the figure's spine and limbs. Electrodes traced patterns along its skull. The skin, where visible beneath the cables, was pale and striped with faint vulpine markings. Lyra gasped. "Commander, that's a second interface," Hale said quietly. "Another captive." The girl shuddered violently in Lyra's arms. Hale knelt beside her. "You know her?" The girl nodded faintly. Her breathing hitched, ears lowering against her skull in a mixture of fear and grief. Lyra's voice trembled. "They didn't just use one. They used multiple interfaces to power the lattice. The one we found above, she wasn't the only one feeding the predictions." Hale looked back at the suspended Vulpine. This one was older, larger, and deeply integrated into the network. More than a processor. A core. A living anchor. A force participant in every calculation the drones ever made. Then the suspended figure's eyes snapped open. Lyra recoiled, nearly dropping the girl. Hale raised his pipe defensively, though he doubted it would do much against whatever this hybrid being was. The captive Vulpine didn't move except for her eyes, which rolled slowly, painfully, toward Hale and the girl. The light around the lattice dimmed. A faint, crackling sound escaped her throat, like trying to speak through broken circuits. Hale stepped closer. "If she's alive, we can disconnect her." Lyra stared at him. "If you disconnect her, the entire structure might collapse." "It's already collapsing," Hale said. "But if she's conscious, she deserves to be freed." The suspended Vulpine suddenly convulsed. The chamber lights flickered. Data streams raced across the crystalline nodes. Lyra glanced rapidly around. "Commander, she's accessing the network manually. She's trying to stabilize the autonomous mode." Hale froze. "Stabilize it?" "She thinks we're Dravari infiltrators," Lyra said, horror creeping into her voice. "She was programmed to defend the core. She doesn't recognize us." The girl pushed weakly out of Lyra's arms, struggling to her feet. Hale caught her before she fell, helping her stand. She lifted both hands toward the suspended Vulpine and let out a soft, broken vocalization, barely a whisper, but filled with meaning. Recognition. Kinship. Pain. Slowly, the suspended figure's convulsions eased. Her eyes focused on the girl. A low hum resonated through the room. The nodes dimmed. Lyra exhaled shakily. She heard her. The older Vulpine's mouth opened, but only static emerged. The girl took another step, fragile but determined. She reached out and placed her hand against the crystalline frame. Hale saw the reaction instantly. The lattice lights steadied. The neural strands slowed their pulsing rhythm. The suspended Vulpine's eyes softened, losing their frantic edge. Lyra whispered, "She's calming her. They're communicating." Hale stepped closer, examining the connection points. The tubes fed both neural data and thermal regulators. If the suspended Vulpine was sustaining the predictive network even in shutdown mode, they needed to disable her connection without killing her. He touched the nearest tube. The Vulpine's eyes widened in warning. Hale pulled his hand back. "She knows," Lyra said. "She understands exactly what will happen if we pull the wrong line." Hale nodded. "We need her help." The girl placed her hand against Hale's chest, then pointed at the lowest node on the frame. Small, inconspicuous, but glowing with a steady blue pulse. Lyra leaned in. "That's a heat regulator bypass. If we disable it, the lattice will drop into safe mode." Hale gripped the metal housing. "She's telling us to break it." The suspended Vulpine blinked once, slowly, deliberately. "Permission." Hale tightened his grip, braced himself, and ripped the node free. The effect was immediate. The chamber lights flickered violently. The neural strands sagged. The suspended Vulpine gasped, a real sound this time, weak but unmistakably alive. The entire lattice wound down like a dying heartbeat. Lyra grabbed the girl and pulled her close. "Is it over?" Hale listened to the room. The hum faded. The cooling fins settled. The auxiliary power modulated into a steady, harmless rhythm. "It's over," Hale said. "At least here." The suspended Vulpine sagged in the frame. Hale examined the restraints. "Help me get her down." Lyra assisted, and together they disconnected the tubes and electrodes one by one. The captive Vulpine collapsed into Hale's arms, light, fragile, but alive. The girl crawled to her side immediately, gently touching her face. The older one managed a faint smile, her breath shallow but steady. Then a deep, metallic boom echoed through the chamber. Hale stiffened. What was that? Lyra checked her scanner. Structural collapse from above. The coolant ring is completely gone. Anyone topside? Probably evacuated. But our path back is gone. The suspended Vulpine raised a trembling hand and pointed toward the far end of the chamber. Another tunnel, hidden behind coolant fins. Hale narrowed his eyes. She knows the way out. Lyra stared at the tunnel. If that leads to the geothermal waste ducts, we could reach the outer ridge. If, Hale repeated. I'll take an if over dying here, Lyra said. Hale lifted the older Vulpine onto his back and supported the girl with his free arm. Slowly, carefully, they moved through the hidden tunnel. The air grew fresher, colder. A faint breeze brushed Hale's face. Lyra looked back. Commander, listen. Hale paused. Silence. No drones. No hum. No alarms. Only the faint sound of wind whistling through natural stone. They reached the end of the tunnel. Hale pushed aside a weakened grate, and sunlight burst through the cracks. Lyra almost laughed. We're outside. The tunnel opened onto a ledge overlooking the Ridge Valley, miles from the facility entrance. Smoke billowed in the distance as portions of the geothermal complex collapsed into itself. The autonomous lattice was dead. The drone network was silent. The planet breathed again. Hale lowered both Vulpines onto the warm rock. The older one reached for the younger, pulling her close despite her weakness. Lyra crouched beside them. What happens now? Hale watched the collapse in the distance, the final plume rising like a signal flare. Now, he said softly. Now we tell Command everything. We shut down every Dravari lattice on every world. And we make sure this never happens again. The girl looked up at him with exhausted gratitude. The older one managed a faint nod, a silent acknowledgement of freedom long overdue. Lyra stood, and them. Hale watched the two Vulpines, their fur stirring gently in the wind. They come with us, he said. They've survived enough alone. The sun rose higher, bathing the ridge in gold. Hale lifted the two Vulpines gently, one in each arm, and began the long walk toward the extraction beacon. The war wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time since landing on Rios 4, Hale felt the faintest flicker of hope, and he carried it with him, step by steady step, refusing to look back at the ruins of what the Dravari built, because what mattered now was the future they would build instead.